What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my laboratory where safety is #1 priority. So in today's video, we're going to be using some more of this Damascus steel that was sent to us by Vegas Forge. You can check them out, link in the description. So we're going to be using their Spirograph Damascus that they sent us. You can't really see the pattern it has on it now unless we etched it in acid. So there's going to be kind of a grand reveal at the end. And I really like rings like that. I think it makes for an interesting video where the ring totally transforms within the last 30 seconds of the video. So stay tuned for that. It's got a really cool look to it. It almost looks like snakeskin. But this is actually going to be a custom order for a customer. So this is already sold actually. And so we've got all of his information here. So we're going to be making it for him. So it needs to be a size 12.5. And then we're going to make it 8 to 9 millimeters wide. I told him 8 millimeters, but I think it might look a little bit better at 9 millimeters. So we'll shoot for somewhere in that range. And then he wants it to have that deep space look. And you've seen some of my other videos where I do the mix of the glow powders to give it kind of a dark, deep space. I do a lot of black and then swirl in some of the other colors. And so we're going to do that, but we're going to make it glow blue. Typically I do green because that's the brightest glow color. And on rings like the deep space where we have to add a lot of color pigment, that can actually detract from the glow brightness. And so this will be a little bit more subtle, the glow that it has, but it's still gonna look nice, and I'll show you some of those long exposure shots of it glowing. It'll look really cool actually. And then we're going to be adding meteorite pieces to it. So overall, this is gonna be a really interesting ring. It's gonna have a lot going on in it. It's this Spirograph Damascus, really exotic material. It's gonna look beautiful. And then it's gonna glow in the dark, which is also pretty cool. It's got meteorite in it, comes straight from outer space. So that's really cool. It's got the deep space look to it. So I think this is gonna be an interesting ring. A challenge to a lot of the rings like this is kind of like less is more. We don't want it to be too crazy, too much going on, but I think we will strike a good balance with this. There's not that much going on. This is just gonna have a different texture. Other than that, it'll look like a fairly standard metal. And the deep space, there's a lot of black in there, and that's on purpose. It makes it a little more subtle with just a slight color pop to it. And then in the dark it'll glow, but that's fine because you can't see the rest of the ring there. So those are kind of all the thoughts that I've got going into this ring. It's got a ton going on, but never at once is this just too flashy or anything like that. So this will make a cool ring, very interesting in all different types of lighting. So our first step, like with most rings that we make out of rods, is going to be to cut a slice of it. I've actually got another piece of, this is Reptilian Damascus that we are like a third of the way through filming, not even, but basically just cutting a piece out like this, and then we're gonna be hollowing it out like you can see here. And then we'll be sizing it up to the size we need, doing some exterior shaping and all that, and we'll go from there. Boom diggity. Dig dog, dig dug. So step one, like I mentioned earlier, we're just cutting a slice of this off, and I'm using my metal bandsaw here. I actually upgraded recently. This one's automated. So you just flip the switch on, you're able to walk away, and then it just slowly but surely cuts that thing in half. You'll see me add a little bit of oil on it, and you obviously want to monitor it because that's not safe. But once it's done, you can see it just turns itself off, and then we've got our disc that we're ready to start hollowing out. And so you'll see I'm using a tungsten carbide center drill here, and I just plunge it through all the way through the center of the disc, and that gives us a starting point that I can then take my boring bar and then widen that hole up. And this Damascus steel, it's a stainless steel alloy that they use, the two different alloys in it. They're both stainless, and it is pretty tricky to machine. So you gotta make sure you're using sharp lathe bits, you're not removing too much material, a few things like that. But as long as you're careful, it does go by pretty well. It just takes a little bit more time than usual to complete the ring. So I'm getting it really close, but not all the way to the final inner diameter, and you can see I'm comparing it versus my notes here. And so I stop a couple fractions of a millimeter before, and that's to give it a little bit of extra strength while I do some of the shaping that you'll see me do here on the outside of the ring. Then once we're done with that, we'll go back and sand the inside out a little bit more so that it'll be the proper ring size. Then using a left hand and a right hand lathe cutter, you see me even up the sides. That makes the two surfaces of the ring nice and flat and perfectly parallel to each other. And then using the Sharpie, I color the whole ring black. And then using the calipers, I measure out how big I want the edges of the ring, and then I scratch a little line into that Sharpie so that I can tell where to stop using these lathe cutters. And to actually form the channel, you see I switch between the left and right hand lathe cutters. That's to get really clean wall edges. And then once I'm done with that, I switch to this square shaped one. And then once I'm done with that, I switch to the flat shaped cutter, and that's to make sure the surface of our channel that we're carving is flat. Now it's at this point that I'm ready to go ahead and add the inlay materials. And so for the deep space, I like to do some of the purple amethyst and then some smaller chunks of the malachite. So you see I put in quite a few pieces of the amethyst. These are pretty subtle, but they will add a nice, and especially when they're surrounded by the black glow powder, they'll be a nice dark and subtle purple. So I think it really adds to the deep space look that we've got going. And then I use smaller chunks of malachite because it's completely opaque and I don't want it to take up too much space in the ring. So use a bunch of them, but smaller ones so that they're a little more subtle and they just add a splash of color wherever they are. And then the first layer of glow powder I do is just with the black powder. And I've actually never shown it on camera, and I do want to do it soon, show how I mix the colors. So I start off with a completely uncolored white powder, and then I mix in color pigments. And I've actually got some of those materials available on my supplies website if you're interested. I've just got a link down in the description. Then once I'm done with that first layer of the black powder, that's when I start sprinkling in some of the other colors. And I'm using 3 other colors, blue, green, and purple. And so if I get carried away, it'll be really easy to overdo it with the coloring on it. So you can see I do a light dusting of the colors almost everywhere. Of course, I deliberately miss a few spots on the ring because I do want there to be some darker black sections. And then I also want to have little patches of color. So for each of the colors, I'll give them kind of their own little spot on the ring. That way each color is individually showcased and you can see sections of it, but nothing's too overpowering. So for the majority of the space on the ring, you'll see a nice swirl of all the colors, and that's what I'm really going for here. Now I've got everything added that we need, and so I'm going to trim it down using a lathe cutter here. I just want to get it completely flush with the surface. And once I get there, you'll see I switch over to a square shaped cutter. And this is important for rings like this that are etched in acid. The reason that I'm cutting the inlay down shorter than the metal is to give us room to completely seal the ring off, and we'll use CA glue for that. So I'm going to polish it up because we won't be able to access this once we completely coat it. So I'm polishing the inlay up, making sure it's all good to go. And then now we'll start adding some of that CA adhesive. And you can see here, it looks great. We're ready to go. So I put on a thin layer of that CA glue. That's just to get everything coated. And then I do another layer or 2, and that's to make sure it's above the rim of the ring. And one thing to note, that first layer that I did, I was using a super thin CA glue. That way it could seep into any of the cracks. I'm hoping to completely seal off the inlay so that there won't be any acid infiltrating into, say, for example, the amethyst stone. So now I just trim the adhesive down, make sure that's flush with everything. And now it's time to add the bevels. And this is pretty simple. I'm just measuring out with the dials on my lathe how far to put the grooves. So I just use a left and right hand cutter for this. And then I use the angled back section of it to give it that nice angle that we're going for. And then I need to do a final polishing here. The polishing step gives us a really nice finish on the inlay section in particular. And then we'll wrap the whole ring in electric tape, and that'll be to protect that because that is our final finish. And then I'm ready to sand the inside out. And like I said, I'm making it a little bit wider so it'll fit on the finger better. But what I'm mostly doing here is grinding a comfort finish into it. So I'm making sure these edges are nice and round so they'll fit comfortably on a finger. Then I'll do a bit of sanding, make sure everything's really smooth and that there's no visible scratch marks. I'm not worrying about getting a perfect polish here because we definitely don't need it. We're going to be soaking this in acid and that'll completely eat away at the exterior of it. We just don't want any big grooves sanded into there because those can be visible after we etch it. So you'll see I finish one side, I flip the ring over, just repeat the same steps on that side as well. Now all of the machining is completely done on the ring. This looks amazing the way it is. This is what a stainless steel glowstone ring would look like. So we could call this a finished product. I think it looks really good. but we're going to take it one step further, and this is what really separates this ring from anything else, and this is kind of the coolest step that we're going to do. So we're going to soak it in ferric chloride, and it's going to etch away one of the types of steel. So the way it works is that they combine two different alloys of steel. One of them will dissolve in acid faster than the other. There will be raised edges, and that's where the metal that's more resistant to the acid is. So while it's etching, I let it go for about an hour or two, and I made sure to flip it about every 30 minutes, and that's to make sure our etching is even. Now we're ready for somewhat of a grand reveal. We will do one final step to make the pattern on it really pop, but here we go. So here you can see the ring. It actually looks way better than I even imagined it would look. This pattern is completely unreal. It looks like Spider-Man's costume or Spiderweb or something like that. It's incredible to look at. And it's such a small pattern. That's one thing that's a challenge in rings. Most things don't have really small, intricate details to them. This definitely does. So this is going to look amazing, especially in some of the macro photos that I'll show at the end. But now, as a finishing touch, we'll take this over to the lathe. I'm going to sand down the ridges on this ring, polish them up so that they'll be extra shiny. That way there'll be a lot of contrast between the two types of metal. So you can see I've got a piece of sandpaper and it's glued to this lathe bit I've got here. And the reason for that is because that keeps it rigid. That way the sandpaper won't bend and conform to the material. That way it'll only sand those raised edges, and that's exactly what we're going for. And the sanding does mess with the polish on the inlay section, so I do use the polishing compound on that to bring the shine back. But then after that we just have to do a little bit of simple sanding on the inside, and we're totally finished. So I think this ring turned out seriously amazing. This is one of those rings that you spend all day making, and it looks fine along the way, but it's really in the last 30 or so minutes of making it that it really starts to come together, and it just looks incredible. And it makes all that time and effort totally worth it. I hope you agree that this was a worthwhile ring to make and a worthwhile video to watch. So if you liked the video, make sure to give it a like. You can subscribe to my channel as well if you want to see my future videos. And if you're interested in ordering one of these rings, I've got it listed on my website today. So you can check that out. There's a link down to it in the description. And I've also got a ton of different other rings made out of a whole bunch of different exotic materials, and I use glow powder for a bunch of them. So check that out if you're interested. I also want to give a huge thanks to Vegas Forge for making this video possible. They're the ones that sent us the material for this ring. They introduced me to such a cool new material. We're definitely going to be ordering a lot more of this for a lot more rings to come. If you're interested in making rings or something similar, please do check out that link in the description, and you can go to their website and buy some for yourself. And as a final Easter egg, this is for that small percentage of people that actually watch to the very end of my videos. I want to reward you guys. So I'm going to do an Amazon gift card giveaway. The way to enter is I need you to go to my Instagram, and I've got a post of the ring that I made in this video. Go to that post and comment "I love" at Crazy Russian Hacker. And if you do that within 48 hours of me posting it, I will enter you into that giveaway. I will select a winner 48 hours from posting this video, and it'll just be random. It doesn't matter how quickly you enter. So yeah, just do that. I've got a link to my Instagram in the description. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.